Hello, friends. It's my honor to introduce today Dr. Macheri Keshavan and Dr. Kaushal Nanavati. They are going to have a conversation about fear, and I'm looking forward for all of us to learn a lot out of their conversation. Thank you.
Dr. Keshavan, it's a pleasure, and I'm afraid we're going to talk about fear today, an area and a subject where you have a lot of academic interest. And, you know, for the folks that are listening in, it's about a 20-minute conversation we're going to have. It's actually our privilege to be with Dr. Keshavan, who's not only published a lot, but also reflected a lot on the impact that fear has, the background, the physiology, the science, and as importantly, ways in which people can help themselves to manage, I would say, their fear response. So we'll get right into it. Quick question for you to start off with is, can you define fear for us in terms of what is it really?
Yeah, thank you. And anyway, good morning and good to meet you, Kaushal, and good morning, everyone. So what is fear? Fear is a subjective emotional state that an individual has in response to a threat. And we psychiatrists make a distinction between fear and anxiety, and that is good to discuss upfront. When we are faced with a threat that is a certain threat, like you're on the street walking and then you suddenly unexpectedly see a truck coming fast towards you, what you experience is fear. What it does is it gets your body into full gear and gets you to run away from the path of that truck. So fear is a subjective experience that is actually helpful, it is useful, it is adaptive, it's a survival function. On the other hand, we make the distinction of fear from anxiety. And what is anxiety? Anxiety is where it is a subjective state of mind where you have a threat that is uncertain and is in the future. For example, you went and wrote an exam and you come back and start worrying, did I answer that question right or wrong? Am I going to pass or fail? And what do I do if I fail? That kind of a state of mind is about the future with uncertainty facing you, and that is anxiety. Anxiety also needs to be distinguished. Anxiety and fear need to be distinguished from from depression. Depression is an unpleasant emotion that is about the past. Something bad happened, and you start feeling, I did something wrong, and start blaming yourself and feeling remorseful. That is sadness or depression. So depression exists in the past, fear exists in the present, and anxiety exists in the future.
That's a great distinction to make, because I do, as a family physician, in lay language, I often tell people, you know, depression is about the past, anxiety is about an anticipated future, it's not even reality.
Yeah.
And depression, unfortunately, the past we can't go back and change, and sometimes people stay emotionally stuck. And part of that stuckness ties into, you know, how our brain adapts, but
Yeah.
also the different parts of the brain and how they connect, not only emotion, but the biochemistry, right? The gates that help us to go in one direction versus the other. I know you've written a lot about this, and you have created some wonderful diagrams with colleagues regarding how we process fear in different parts of the brain. And just for the lay audience, but also we have a broad audience that listens to, you know, our podcast. So I think about regions of the brain like the amygdala, which is a master controller for fear, but it's influenced by the prefrontal cortex, right? By the hippocampus. It's influenced by the thalamus, different parts of the brain. And if we can kind of bring it down to my level, let's say, for you to explain, just for people to understand that when you have something that feels like fear, what's actually happening in the brain at the time?
Yeah. I think you pointed to all the right organs in the brain. The way the brain has evolved, it has evolved as a system with different circuits in the brain subserving different functions. Let's go back to the example I gave of you walking on the street and a truck rapidly approaching you, and you don't even have time to think, and you got to react even before thinking and get running away from where you are. So there is a part of the brain which is deeply hidden inside the inner part of the brain called the amygdala, which you mentioned. So that's like the warning system. So the information about the approaching truck bypasses the higher brain regions and goes straight to the amygdala and starts off an alarm signal. And what does the amygdala do? It sends its information to lower brain regions like the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And it basically pours out adrenaline so that you have enough blood flowing, your heart rate going fast enough so that you can run. Yes, exactly. And it also releases other hormones like cortisol, which create get the body ready for dealing with a high stress situation in the next few minutes and hours and so forth. And so it sends information to the hypothalamus, another brain region, which governs how the heart works and how the lungs work. And so it speeds up the heart by activity of the hypothalamus. So you have this warning system, and evolution has given that to us for a good reason. We need a immediate response mechanism. But then these immediate responses are not really needed when things are calm. Okay, when next time something happens, you're walking on this sidewalk, and there is no need to be afraid of being hit by a truck, but still you hear a sound of a truck coming. Because you have previously had that experience, your brain still thinks as though the truck is going to hit you, and your heart begins to race. So that is a fear that is not founded in actual immediate threat, but still is your brain reacting as if there is a threat.
It's sort of like what we call a recall bias, right? Which
Exactly,
is
recall bias.
done that,
Exactly.
and so yeah, it comes back, right?
Now,
So
how does our brain protect ourselves against that?
yeah, go ahead.
So we have the higher brain region, which you can call it the conductor of the orchestra. If the brain is like an orchestra, there is a conductor for the orchestra, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of the brain. So when the threat passes, the brain thinks about it. What do I do next in order to avoid this happening? Or did it really happen that way, and was I just simply overreacting? The brain reasons out the response and develops a strategy for the future. So that is called an executive brain. That's the executive function of the brain. So people who develop anxiety are those that are not using the prefrontal cortex well enough. Those who master anxiety and use it for good reasons, good purposes, for adaptive purposes, are they are the ones who have mastered the use of the prefrontal cortex. I'll give you another example. You're walking in the woods, let's say in California, you're trekking, and you hear the rustling of sound in the grass as you're walking, and without you knowing, you're running because it could be a rattlesnake. But then a few seconds later, your prefrontal cortex thinks about it. It's probably not the rattlesnake, it is just the wind that is blowing, and so forth. And begins to understand and reduce the fear. So prefrontal cortex turns down the activity of the amygdala. And when the prefrontal cortex is not functioning right, the amygdala responds to every neutral threat as if that is a dangerous situation. So that's the distinction between fear and healthy emotions.
So I think this is a great point, and I think this is where I want to inject some words actually that you brought up that are fascinating, right? So there's reaction, and sub of reaction is action, right? So there's a
Yeah.
difference between
Yeah.
reaction and action. There's also a thing that I like to share with my patients, which is between reaction and response lies your defining moment, right? And creating that pause actually helps the
Yeah.
mud, the
Yeah.
angst to settle, so you have clarity, and then you can proact versus
Absolutely.
react, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we think about that, and in terms of ways in which people can approach this, in conventional medicine, we have psychotherapy and cognitive behavior therapy. We have pharmaceuticals and medications, and generally, medications actually don't resolve the thing, but they can help rebalance the brain chemistry so we can actually have a better process
Yeah.
of handling information and adapting to it, right? And then there are things that we can do and people can do on their own. And part of our goal through these podcasts is to help people also recognize the tools that we can give to them or they can experience so that the power comes back to them to manage their life better. Things like mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness, exercise, stress management techniques of focusing on things that they can control. And you've done a lot of work with, working with patients as well. And if you could share some of the approaches that you found to be valuable. I mean, one thing I read, which was fascinating, was social isolation and social connectivity, right?
Yeah.
We know social connectivity is good if the group that you're connected to isn't all fear oriented, right? Because then you're gonna get the herd mentality. So maybe
Yeah.
you can share some thoughts on that with us as well.
Yeah, I think you described the approaches to address anxiety, much better than what I would have. So just go back to the same metaphors and the analogy I described of how anxiety becomes a pattern of maladaptive response to situations. Um, so it's like a warning system that has become hyper alert. So there are different ways of addressing that. One is you can, just simply turn down the amygdala activity by medications. So how does the amygdala respond? It does so by activating neurotransmitters like adrenaline, right? So there are medicines that block adrenaline, like beta blockers, which can reduce anxiety. The other neurotransmitter systems that really become heightened in the situation of anxiety and fear is what we call the excitatory neurotransmitters in the brain, like glutamate. And what is needed is like the opposite of that, the inhibitory systems in the brain, like gamma aminobutyric acid. There are some medicines like benzodiazepines, like your Ativan or diazepam, which enhance the activity of the GABA system and thereby fine tune the brain back into being into a state of calmness. The other thing to think about is that when we are in an anxious, fear inducing situation, I mentioned the other brain structure, hypothalamus. It activates a set of a nervous system, a branch of nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. And counter to that, we have inbuilt a system called the parasympathetic nervous system, where there is an activity of the vagus nerve and other branches of the parasympathetic system, which are calming and restoring function and allowing the brain to recover. So there are approaches which enhance the activity of parasympathetic nervous system, like the vagus, such as pranayama, taking deep breaths, especially taking deep exhalations with an increased ratio of exhalation to inhalation. In times of acute anxiety, deep breaths. In fact, Navy SEALs use that, what is called box breathing.
Yeah.
4 seconds in, 4 seconds retain breath, 4 second exhalation, and 4 seconds retention in the exhalation phase.
Yeah.
That is called the box breathing. These are simple techniques to reduce anxiety. So turn down that parasympathetic nervous system. Then the other important thing that you mentioned of putting a pause between the immediate response and the incoming threatening stimulus. Between the stimulus and the response, you need to put a pause. And that is what will allow the prefrontal cortex to take control. And how do you put a pause between the incoming threat and the response? Is mindfulness. Take a few deep breaths, and during that time, just observe the mind, observe the thoughts before reacting. You mentioned action versus reaction versus proaction. The key in treating anxiety is to put a pause so that you do less of reactivity and more of reasoning based action, and also more proactive steps. So these are some of the approaches from a psychological angle. So I talked about medications which work on the neurotransmitters in the brain. I talked about certain techniques like breathing, which help with autonomic regulation, and mindfulness and meditation, which can help putting that pause in the brain. Then there is the fourth one,
Yep.
which is cognitive behavior therapy, and that is training the prefrontal cortex to understand the rational versus irrational aspects of thinking. So that's another approach.
Absolutely. And, there are studies that show that MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, may even be more effective than CBT, or cognitive
Yes.
behavioral therapy. And it's fascinating. So the breath, and for our audience again, to keep it simple, when you have a thought of fear, when you feel anxiety, one of the most important you can do is take the slowest, deepest breath in, proactively focusing on the breath, and then actively breathing out even slower. And if you're focusing on that, suddenly you're not focusing on the fear, and you literally created a fork in the road. And now you can choose which direction to go in versus feeling stuck with where you are, right? So simple technique that makes a big difference. And the other one that I was reading on, exercise. And again, exercise affects a brain hormone called brain-derived natriuretic factor, or BDNF. And what's fascinating is that if you do intense exercise, that actually helps reduce anxiety and or fear better than if you're kind of going at a slow pace. So sometimes that getting that energy out, releasing it, makes a big difference. And then breath technique. A lot of people breathe with their chest. What we know is that abdominal breathing, or breathing with the belly, you get more oxygen per breath, and that's the physiology. Over time, I think 2011, Harvard published a study, where 10 minutes or more actually lowered the adrenaline and the cortisol, boosted the serotonin and the dopamine, so people could actually feel better. And so it's simple. People can, in the morning, use the breath technique to set and visualize a positive day. And then at nighttime, gratitude and grace. Gratitude, thankfulness, grace, acceptance, and forgiveness, releasing, right, can be very valuable. So I really appreciate your time. You've given us some wonderful insights into what fear is, how it affects our body, and techniques that we can use to help ourselves, and also to seek out help from experts, because it does require a tribe, and finding the right people who are going to proact with us versus react with us can be very valuable. So thank you very much. I look forward to future conversations where we can go deeper into fear, but also into joy and gratitude and attention and focus. I think it would be fantastic for us to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nanavati. It was a pleasure.
Hi, I'm Divija Nanavati, one of the co-founders of Happily Club. And I wanted to thank today Dr. Macheri Keshavan and Dr. Kaushal Nanavati for your time. And I also really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.